Hello. So my name is Garfield Jones. I am the Senior Vice President for Global Strategy and Research at QSecure. So I wanted to answer a couple questions that I was asked in response to the Google 2029 announcement, uh, which I guess when they pointed at 2029 for readiness and trying to understand the risks that are already visible today that teams may be underestimating. I think that was one of the questions that we really had to answer was what risks are already visible today that teams may be underestimating. I I think one of the main risks is the harvest now, decrypt later issue that people don't realize how much damage that can do as we um, as we go through. The data is being secured now. The adversaries are taking our data, and they're going to use it eventually. And that could be sensitive data that we are not seeing. We're like, oh, it's gone. Don't worry about it. It's encrypted. It's encrypted for now. But as we move on, and that cryptographically relevant quantum computer starts to get closer and closer, as we see from Google's announcement, 2029. We're currently 4 or 5 months into 2026, and it's getting closer. And you never know if it's going to come any earlier. Yeah, we hope it comes later, but even later, I still think we have a huge problem with that. So I think the harvest now, decrypt later is one of the risks that we see is really happening and is being um, underestimated. I think also the timeline. People don't realize transition takes a lot of time and money and effort and everything else like that. We also don't have a good inventory of all of our cryptographic assets. The I guess you could say, in the sense of the surprises and what is some of the areas that we didn't know about or we didn't think about or we haven't used in a while, and we have some very old cryptography still around within the organization. I think those are some of the areas that we're not seeing, but are really a risk of today that people don't realize. And we're still using deprecated algorithms. We're still using outdated or keys that aren't rotated well, or so I think those are the areas that we really see that teams may really be underestimating. And the other question was, for companies handling sensitive data, what signs would signal that their current encryption may not be holding up? That's an interesting question because I think one of if you look at companies today, uh, they feel like their encryption is holding up, but what they don't understand is their data is still out there. But the question asking about the signals or the signs, I think when you start looking at, if you're seeing people or integrators or developers or testers are starting to really get hold of real data to be able to use and test, even in environments, that's signaling that, hey, there's your encryption might not be as good as you think. If they're able to use your real data and give you high fidelity test cases and use cases that basically point to your real data, I think that's where we're you would have to wonder, how is that possible that it's so good? but you'd be happy that it's that good. But then you'd be like, well, where did you get this data? So that would be my question. And how and what data did you use that you were able to get this accuracy and this precision? Pointing back to the outdated. So once you've inventoried, seeing that there's outdated algorithms, seeing that you're not using uh, some people may be on TLS 1.1 or something like that. Even 1.2 now is not going to save you. You have to start moving to 1.3. So seeing where we have outdated and deprecated algorithms again, that's another piece. And a lot of organizations do penetration testing. And if you're starting to see your penetration testing results start to show a lot of encryption risk and holes and vulnerabilities, that might be an indication that your current encryption is not holding up well. The other part of it would be, I think, if you're as an organization, if you're starting to see an increase in incidents that really penetrate deeply into the organization, that are are high threat and almost catastrophic, like incidents that take data that are really that makes the organization at risk. I think that's where you really have to look at that as a signal of yeah, I need to start looking at my encryption. Also, if other or similar organizations that are around that are operate similar to what your organization does, I think that's another area that you would have to look at and say, uh, that is, and if they're having problems or they're starting to see their encryption issues are starting to pop up, maybe you should look at yours and follow suit and kind of, and sometimes you have to look to the left and the right and see what they're doing, and then say, okay, well, maybe I need to do the same thing. I'm not as squeaky clean as I thought I was. I think the most important piece is, if you're really starting to see your sensitive information go out to other industry or competitors, they're starting to use bits and pieces that you were like, no, how did they get that? That was ours or something like that. That might be an indicator. The other piece of it is, if you're starting to see reports, maybe from adversarial countries and articles that are starting to pop up that really speak to your sensitive information and your IP. That's another great sign or indicator that that encryption that I thought I had wasn't is not that great. So just kind of moving on to the next question. I think the next question was, many teams hear about quantum risks but don't act on it. What might what might delay their action? A few things. One is, we've got a lot of old guard in there, where some people just, I mean, plain don't believe it. That's one. That's a very simple answer. But the other piece is, they just have so much on their plate right now, and they're like, that's not a now problem. That's a future problem. Granted, yes, it's a future problem, but it's 2.5 years away, and that's transition, and we've seen security transitions before, and they take a long time. But they've got so much they're acting on operationally right now to try to protect the organization. They're like, hey, I just need to I just need to make it through to, these next couple hours, or tomorrow. So there's definitely that people kind of delay, and a lot of talk about 2029, and there was 2035, there was 2050. There's so many different dates being thrown out, and I think you have to really look at your organization and say, do I really want to be not prepared when when this happens? It's not, and I was about to say if, and it really isn't an if, it's a when it's going to happen. The other part of that question of the delay is the costs. I mean, it's not going to be cheap. This is not. It's no transition is ever cheap, but there are ways to for a reduction if you architect correctly, and use products that don't require rip and replace. Those are things that will help to lower your costs. I think the other part of it is the resources to put against it. To include the costs. That is one of the main things that people like. How are we got to get the education in there. We got to figure out what to do, and then okay, now that I know what to do, or now that I know that I have to do the inventory, what's next? What's the end look like? What does transition look like? So those are things that kind of delay, and we keep putting information out, but I don't think people are necessarily they're able to keep up with all the information. But there are ways to look at to answer those questions. What are transitions? What does the transition look like? What does the end look like? And so we have to look. That tends to keep people frozen in place for a little bit. So I think one of the other questions, for security leaders starting to prepare, what steps should they take without overhauling their system? The main thing is, I think one of the first steps that you should do is basically move from TLS 1.2 to 1.3. That's the one of the easier transition points that you don't need to overhaul your system with. And then if you're using a a zero trust methodology where you can just point and click and get certain policies out, get the new algorithms out to your cryptographic assets. So I mean, there's definitely once you've inventoried it, having your IT assets just kind of pick up those algorithms, and those are not hard to do when you have the right vendor. I mean, in QSecure, yes, they are, they have a solution to definitely transition you without overhauling your system. And I think, as you see, certain assets will not be able to handle these new algorithms because they are heavier than the old encryption algorithms. And so as we transition over to those are going to gradually have to be replaced. But you're also going to have to do some enterprise architecture in there where you maybe use the more robust IT assets to protect the less capable IT and OT assets. So there will be some areas where you can work on that. And my time in the government, it's before I joined QSecure, I was a senior executive at CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. And one of the questions here is, what is the level of preparedness among, between the government and enterprise environments related to post-quantum readiness, and what are they heading towards? And then I think, the government is still in the, you know, I would say the awareness and a little bit of preparedness where they're still doing the inventories, but they haven't started to transition those assets or those cryptographic assets to some of the FIPS, the FIPS 203, 204, and 205. And then I can't say that the as the vendors as some of the vendors haven't transitioned to TLS 1.2 or TLS 1.3, but there is some documentation out there that's saying, hey, look, we need to start moving, and we're not, and they're starting to cut off the procurement, where CNSA 2.0 has already said that come 2027, end of 2027, they're not even buying anything that's not PQC ready. The government is starting to put out documentation like this is a product categories. The OMB 2302 memo kind of laid it out. There was even a early roadmap that has laid it out, where to go. So they are starting to move towards that PQC, and there's even some mention of going from hybrid, going towards hybrid, and concerns about backwards compatibility. But I think with the 2029 announcement, I don't even know if we'll have time for a lot of hybrid and backwards compatibility. I mean, we'll have to use them because now not all assets will be able to transition at the drop of a hat. So we'll have to implement some backwards compatibility and hybrid type architecture within them so that the government can still operate, because the government still has some very old systems that will not be able to handle these new algorithms. So I think the timeline and the 2029 timelines signals to the industry that you need to get moving. It's not just we're not in the awareness and preparedness stage. We're not just inventorying cryptographic assets or anything like that. We need to now move towards having action, and we need to get this moving. I think the last question here are, where do you see the biggest gap between what leadership believes about quantum readiness and what is actually happening on the ground? I think I think leadership is starting to really understand that this is not something that you can sweep on the or kick the can down the road, sweep on the road, whatever you want to call it. I think we're starting to see the ground in leadership start to talk and work hand in hand. And as I say, they still have that where do we end? How much is this going to cost? How long does this go? This doesn't end really. I mean, encryption, it's an ongoing issue. It happens all the time. You're going to have, as the quantum computer gets more and more powerful, it's going to probably be able to break the encryption that we have today, or even I mean, the encryption that is available in terms of the new quantum resistant algorithms. But and so we're going to have to keep updating our assets and everything else. Depending on how valuable you see your sensitive information, or your sensitive data, that's the amount of money you're going to have to put into it, and you're going to have to keep putting that money into it to protect what is yours, and what is relevant to your company, and protect your core competencies in your company or your organization. So thanks for listening, and appreciate your time. And hopefully I answered some of the questions that you had that were relevant to what is going on. Have a good day.